We've pulled up the sofa, plumped up the cushions. And the guest with us today, we actually met at the Chelsea Flower Show. But as I said, Brian Alabaster doesn't grow plants or arrange flowers. He uses his hands to create the most beautiful statues, often of children. And you may have seen the photo on Facebook of the one that he sold of 13-year-old Florence Barker. She was dancing, and the sale of the statue was to help her pay her ballet school fees. So welcome to the calm of the studio. You're a little more casual in dress than you were when I saw you at the Chelsea Flower Show.
I thought the wonder of radio is nobody could see what I was wearing.
Oh, well, I've dobbed you in there. You are true. It's true. Did you have a good Chelsea?
We had a fantastic Chelsea. It's our only outing, so it's nice to get away from the studio and meet all our clients, and it's just a very nice week as you experience when you're up at the show.
And did you sell lots?
We sold a number of pieces, enough.
Yeah, because then we'll hear they're not going to be cheap pieces because so much work goes into them, and so you need to be somewhere where you're going to capture people who are going to have the money to buy them, aren't you?
Yeah, we sell a range of different things. So a lot of the pieces are sold as one-offs. They're commissions where people commission me to make sculptures of their family, doing family groups. But we also sell pieces as additions. So we sell maybe one of 10 or two of 10, which are obviously a lot less expensive.
And the one of Florence, which was beautiful, that sold really early on.
That sold pretty much it sold on the first night. I heard you talking about Nelson earlier, and he's a very avid Nelson memorabilia collector from Hereford. In fact, he's got a massive collection of pictures and other memorabilia. But he bought that for his gardens in Hereford. So yeah, we installed it the week after the show.
So do you take them? You do go and put them in?
Yeah, no, I went up there.
You go and check they're in a decent place, do you?
Well, obviously, you spend that sort of money, you're going to put them in a decent place, really.
Yeah, because I think you were saying you wanted around about 18,000. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what he paid, 18,000. But I didn't see any of that. It all went straight
to Florence.
Yeah, straight. It had her name on the cheque.
That's fantastic.
Her name and Coots.
So should we go back to the beginning and then we'll come up to date, and because you've got websites and people can see your work and that sort of thing, and you've got a couple of books there as well. But I was intrigued because you sent me details of, I think, a catalogue you're putting together with a bit of your history. Yeah,
it was just somebody was asking me how many pieces I'd made, what I'd made, and I haven't kept a very good record, so I was trying to put together
it's all blurred rather
a visual record, and then and in order to do that, I had to try and remember what on earth I was doing, as trying to remember back. If you haven't kept a diary, it's pretty hard.
I was fascinated because it wasn't the thing you did when you left school. I mean, you didn't come to this properly till you were about 35ish, is that right?
No, absolutely not. No, I didn't really do art at school beyond first year of grammar school for various reasons, and I'd always sketched and done a little bit of work at home, but I hadn't done anything on this sort of scale until I had children of my own. And as I'm sure you realise, when you've got children, you want to record them in whatever way you can, photograph them, or if you could draw, you draw pictures of them. And I don't know.
Did you draw pictures? Yeah.
I did draw pictures of them, but I was reading a book by an Italian called Benvenuto Cellini at the time, his autobiography. It was talking about sculpture, and I thought I'd have a go at that. And so I sat one kid down and lump of clay, push it around. There you go.
You said you sat on the workbench in the kitchen or something.
It was my oldest son who was then about 4 or 5, and I sat him on the kitchen table. Yeah.
Did he sit still for long enough?
Well, kids don't sit still, but with sculpture, it's not like drawing. You don't have to sit quite as still for sculpture as you do for drawing, because it's an all-round 3D effect you're looking for. So in some ways, you could say they're helping you by moving.
And was that really the first time you'd done it?
That was the very first time I'd done it. Yeah.
So the feel of it and just the tactile sense and the shaping of it. And
it was much more. It was just merely trying to find something. It didn't matter what it was, plasticine or clay, just moving it around until it in some way represented what it was I was looking at.
And I think you were quite pleased with it, weren't you?
I was chuffed as heck. I was. I really was. I thought it was brilliant, but I didn't think it was good enough.
What did your wife think when she saw it?
She was quite impressed, but I mean, I didn't think it would ever go beyond that. I just thought everybody could do it, and I was pleased, and we didn't really take it any further. And then somebody came round to the house, and I'd cast some of these into lead at the time. I'd done them in the kitchen, and somebody came round to the house and said, "Oh, why don't you exhibit these in a gallery in Cranbrook in Kent?" It was an exhibition, a local art exhibition, and I did. I didn't dare go along. I was too terrified. So I had some cards printed with Brian Alabaster, sculptor, on the cards, which I felt was a step too far.
So you felt you were a bit of a fraud.
I did really feel a bit of a fraud, and I felt I just couldn't face talking to anybody and actually owning up to having made these. But I peered round the corner and saw lots of red dots. And we'd sold out. We'd sold everything, and a lot more besides. So within a year, about 18 months from then, I was doing it full time.
Do you know, until I read the notes you put together, I never really thought about I'd always thought how beautiful they are, how artistic it is, but I'd never thought of the trial and error. But there's a lovely bit where you say that you decided you'd use lead because you could melt that on the kitchen stove and until you were sort of kicked out of the kitchen. But it is sort of like kitchen sink sort of work and kitchen worktop to start with.
Well, the principle of casting that I use is called lost wax casting. So you make something in wax, bury it in plaster, burn away the wax and replace what was wax with molten metal. So in order to do it easily, you want a metal that melts at a low temperature. And lead, I wouldn't recommend anybody do this, but until you're thrown out of the kitchen, you can melt it on the kitchen stove. So that's what I did. That wasn't the worst. Lead was not the biggest disaster in the kitchen. But anyway, after several disasters and many all-night clear-ups, I was moved out to the shed.
I want to know more now. What are the disasters?
Well, the worst thing you can ever do is, I can tell you, is to drop a full bowl of as yet not hard plaster of Paris on the floor at about 2 o'clock in the morning because it splashes everywhere and then it has to be cleaned off before it goes hard. So it took all night really to clean that off. And the other thing I did, which wasn't successful, was trying to dry the water out of wax in the Aga. And the water boils, and when you open the door of the Aga, there's spitting vapour of wax and water comes shooting out and then ignites as it comes out the door, leaving burnt marks all across your cork floor.
Yeah, no wonder you got kicked out.
That was it.
That was a patient.
That was the last straw, and I was then in the shed.
And you mentioned the fact that you were working at night, and this is because at this time it was a hobby, wasn't it? It was. You were still holding down a day job. I think looking after a vineyard and garden centre, wasn't it?
Well, it was a nurse, a big glasshouse nursery and vineyard.
So is that what is that what you did when you left school?
No. When I left school, I worked building and designing hatcheries in the Middle East, mainly in the Middle East, in Yemen and Egypt and Iran.
Chicken hatcheries?
Chicken hatcheries. Huge chicken hatcheries. Built like hospitals.
Oh, big. Right, okay.
They're just, it's a very industrial process designed to turn hatching eggs into chicks, which can then be fattened for food, or if they're layer chicks, can be raised to lay eggs.
It's what we call factory farming, I suppose.
I'm afraid it's not a very PC.
Not a good term.
It's not something you want the cameras in when you're all these little chicks being sexed and yes, because for laying chicks, of course, the males don't have much future, and Not good. Not something. Not a part of my life. I do eat. I eat chicken, but I eat a lot of game in the winter. I always think that game has at least had a bit of fun. It's had a bit of life before it's been killed.
So anyway, you that was aside, wasn't it? Really, you were working on busier on this nursery vineyard, and at some point you had to make that choice, didn't you?
Yeah, I've been looking for something to do, and after we had the show, it was just obvious that I did the sums and worked out that if I could. The prices I could sell these for, I could make a living. And having made that decision, the choice between earning a good wage but having to say yes sir, no sir to a boss, or maybe earning a lot less but living a life in the countryside in Suffolk or somewhere, was very appealing. And so, no sooner... I then had to try and engineer my departure.
And I mean, the talk came out. And is that when you moved to Suffolk as well?
Yeah, we moved to Suffolk in end of 93, early 94. And we loved Suffolk. Franny, my wife, had taught here at Claydon when she was younger. Taught in Claydon High School and lived in Orford. So I'd spent a lot of time in Suffolk, and we both had, and so it was a natural choice. And it's also the people are very sort of supportive and quiet, and it's just a very much nicer style of living than Kent, which is all very money and fast cars and lots of traffic on the roads, and just a completely different atmosphere.
There are a lot of artists here, actually, aren't there?
There are, yes. I think they came up when housing was cheap in the 60s and stayed.
And did you needed somewhere, I guess, with a studio, because you were, by this stage, I guess, not doing it all on the kitchen
No,
table.
I needed quite a bit of space, and so we bought a farmhouse with some barns attached. And a bit of land around, so that we didn't have any neighbours to complain about the noise or the smells.
And were you going to do all your own casting as well?
We did at that time. We did all our own casting, and have done for many years. We don't now. In fact, I've just come from a foundry in London today, where I've dropped off a couple of commission pieces. It's just got too hard on physically too hard for me to do it, and I'm so busy with the sculpting that I don't need to do the casting anymore.
When you started that sculpting that first time, and did you know that was like home for you? Was it what you'd always been made to do?
It is pretty exciting. Nothing like lots of hot metal splashing around to get the adrenaline going. And over the years, it got much less exciting, but it's still a real buzz when something comes out of a mould, and you see.
I gather it hasn't always over the years.
No. I have many disasters in my history, I'm afraid.
What's the worst one? I told you I'd want to ask about the failures.
Failures, yes. I think probably the most scary was I was really in the early days when I was still using roofing lead. Roofing lead that I'd bought from a reputable source.
I'm glad you said that.
But anyway, rolls of roofing lead, which I was melting down to pour in to make these. These were life-size, whole figure, so they're standing children. So we needed quite a lot of lead, and I had a big steel cauldron which I was melting this in, and I dropped a roll of roofing lead into the cauldron, but unfortunately I hadn't fully dried it, and in the middle of it was some water trapped, and of course that boiled as soon as it hit the molten lead and blew the whole cauldron out of the cauldron, emptied the whole cauldron. So there's about 150, 200 kilos of lead that just exploded in the workshop. I was stood there well dressed and I know now that I was well dressed and well protected because I didn't die, but when I recovered from the shock and looked
around,
it flung
you across the room.
No, it just hit me. This massive sort of shower of molten lead, but it left a complete shadow of me on the wall, and so you could see exactly where I was standing.
Like one of these cartoons,
because
Tom and Jerry cartoons.
There was a shadow exactly my shape, or all around. The rest of the room was completely coated in little splatters of lead, which was stuck to the wall, stuck to the paint.
So you were obviously covered, because any of that on your skin would be awful.
I've never had an accident. I shouldn't say that. Never had an accident in the foundry. So I think you always wear leathers and
goggles
face masks and helmets, and so you're assuming something. I always assume something's going to go wrong.
I think it's probably a good thing, isn't it?
And it often does. So.
What happens to all the lead? Is that all wasted, or can you chip it all off?
Actually, a lot we did. Yeah, I'm afraid a lot of that did get wasted. But I was just glad to be alive, really.
Amazing. Do you ever do gold or bronze?
I don't, but the process is the same. But they're much more specialised foundries that do that. I just do bronze, or have been doing bronze. I don't really anymore. Gold and bronze and lead are all very similar processes, just different temperatures for melting. Gold is much heavier than lead, which people don't realise.
There's me thinking that this sculpture's life was, artistic and flowing scarves and gentle and peaceful, and here we are. It's like being in a chemist's workshop, isn't it? Really,
it's very like that. It's very industrial, I'm afraid. But there are the artistic moments when you're pushing clay around and wearing a smock. But most of the time it's overalls and safety boots.
We'll come back. We'll talk more in just a minute or two. Try and explain why, because yours are really lifelike, the work you do, aren't they, rather than being anything too imaginary or whatever. So we'll talk about that, although I know you've got plans for the future. We'll talk more in just a minute or two. Brian Alabaster on the sofa makes the most beautiful, creates the most beautiful. You sculpture them or you sculpt them?
Sculpt, I'd say.
To sculpt. That's a good word, isn't it?
Model or sculpt.
Yes, it's lovely figures, lots of children, but more family groupings now, as well, you said.
It's most of my work's private commission, so it's really whatever people want to have a sculpture of, and generally that's their children. They always ask me to do their dogs, but I don't really.
You don't do dogs.
I don't do dogs.
You do children. I
do children. I do bodies. I mean, children and young adults. It tends to be so a lot of family groups.